Great.
Yes.
9 o'clock
Hello.
already.
Yes. Good morning. Hi, Sophie.
Good morning, Stefan, and good morning, everyone who joined. So we see that people have joined already. And we know
Yes.
it's still ticking in.
Yes,
Very much welcome.
We have had a great uptake and big interest in this topic. Over 100 people joining us today for this webinar about data management and data strategy. So we see the numbers are picking up. Just leave it a couple of more seconds before we start this. But again, very welcome this morning to everyone who's joining us. So before we jump in to all the interesting details, just some housekeeping rules. On the right-hand side of your screen, you have a questions and a chat box that you are most welcome to use during the event. Put in your questions that come up, and we will end all of this with a Q&A. So please feel free to use this, and we will get back to these questions later on. So we are ready to start this. Before we jump in and I give the word to Sophie about SustainLab and the data management, just a couple of words about us, because today we will not share so much about the company SustainLab and the system that we also have. So as you may know, or I hope you know, we are a system provider for sustainability reporting and all the consultancy around that topics. Today, the focus is about the data management and data strategy. We will go through the details around this. What you want today is a series that we have regarding CSRD. And if you're interested in the module about CSRD, please come back to us and we will send you the link of that recording as well. We have another one coming up in a couple of weeks' time regarding GHG calculations. We will get back to you about that later on. Sophie, please take over.
Yeah, it's 2 minutes past, so I see that the numbers are still ticking up, but also worth mentioning that we do record this session. So if you didn't get the first part, or if you want to share it with someone after this session, just feel free to do that. But we are going to talk today about CSRD data management and share some best practices when defining the data strategy. And I think it's so interesting and exciting to see how many people who are interested in this data strategies. We talk about it a lot, and we talk about it with other companies, and we see that this is really something that is challenging for many, and it's very much related to the CSRD reporting. So I hope it will bring you some insights and support you in your journey going forward. But let's dive in. I have one just starting slide to set the context a little bit on why we are doing this session. And first of all, as I guess most of you know, is that many companies are now accelerating towards CSRD, and perhaps you are one of them, and need to start data collection from January 2025. And it is a great bunch of companies who will report on 2025 years data, handing in their CSRD report for the first time in 2026. But that means that from 1st of January, this upcoming year, you need to know what data to collect, because it's really, really hard sometimes to collect the data in retrospective if you don't have the processes to capture that data. So this is very prominent right now. We see many companies really accelerating with a focus on January 2025. If you are up to date with the CSRD legislation, you probably know that the ESRS standards are the standards used for reporting on CSRD. So it's two different abbreviations that we will use sometimes interrelated here, but CSRD is the legislation, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, while the ESRS is the European Sustainability Reporting Standards used for reporting on CSRD. So that's why those are sometimes used interrelated. But the standards, they cover a total of more than 1,100 data points. Not all will be material to your organization perhaps, but in total it's more than 1,100 data points. But what we are talking a lot about is that those data points are on an aggregated level, and that's what we will talk about mostly in this session. What does that mean, and what does it mean? How do you do to come up to those aggregated numbers? And if that feels a little bit fluffy right now, please hold on and let me know by the end of the session if I want to if I need to clarify something. But those aggregated data points, they requires underlying data. One other thing is that transparency is key when it comes to CSRD. It's not only those data points that needs to be disclosed, it's also your assumptions related to those data points, the uncertainties you have on the data you disclose, the calculation methods you have used, and the emission factors or conversion factors. So all of this should be disclosed together with each metric, and that's why it's also so important for you to do your data strategy and set your strategy so you are aware of the numbers you disclose as well. And then the last thing on why we're doing this session and why we are doing these kind of projects for many of our customers is that CSRD is just one of the many reasons to why it's important to collect sustainability data. And if you are one of those who are reporting on several standards or have internal needs and want the data for several reasons, it's of course helpful if we can streamline this process and not collect the data once per need, so to speak. And just on that point, I just want to show you an example which is very which illustrates quite well how many companies have it out there. And when we show this picture, Stefan, I know you agree on this, but many times that we have shown this to companies, everyone feels like, that's exactly how it is for me. So don't feel alone if you recognize yourself in this. But for example, if you report on energy consumption, and perhaps you report on GRI or have been reporting on GRI for a while, you have probably split your energy data into non-renewable sources and renewable sources and collected that data and then reported on that. Then a little bit later during the year, perhaps you report on CDP, and then it's not enough to only split by non-renewable and renewable sources. Here you also need to split by the sustainable biomass, other biomass, coal, oil and gas, and renewable hydrogen. And if you didn't capture those parameters the first time you collected the data, perhaps you need to go back once again and collect the data over again in order to report on CDP. And now when the CSRD comes, the disaggregation is a little bit different again. So now you need not only to report on your fossil sources as a bunch, if you are one of those companies who needs to also disaggregate by fossil source, you need to report on natural gas, by coal, by petroleum or oil and other fossil sources. You need to disaggregate by nuclear sources, and you need to disaggregate by renewable sources, including biomass. We will hold on to this example during the session, so I will illustrate this a little bit more. But this is how it looks for many companies, and then it's also one of the reasons to why a data strategy is key when you can look into all of the different parameters you need to collect in order to get everything you need and report on everything you need, but not to forget also to drive the change you want for your company.
And this is a super important point that you're making here, Sophie, because this is a question that comes up in every customer meeting we have. And here is where SustainLab may differentiate a bit. We are, taking the raw data all the way to compliance, rather than being individual reporting tool. This is a platform, a standard platform for all kind of sustainability
Yeah.
reporting. And you can, while taking the raw data together, what we're talking about today, really make the most of your work and on a term basis. So very, very important point. And as you say, a lot of clients are in this position.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And we know that there are a lot of reporting system out there where you get all the questions you need to report on for either of those GRI, CDP, CSRD, and everything. But why we're holding this session is also because we want to show you what the data looks like down under this reporting form and how you can get this data in a good way. So thanks for pointing that out. So from this example, I also want to just set the context a little bit of the CSRD standards. I won't spend too much time on this because I think many of you are aware already, but the standards or the CSRD legislation and the ESRS standards, again, that I talked about before, are split into those 4 parts: cross-cutting, environmental, social, governance. And within this, we have 12 different reporting standards, so either the cross-cutting standards or the topical standards. So this is just to remind ourselves a little bit on what we are gonna on what we use for reporting. But another way of looking into this is also the different layers or the hierarchy of the ESRS. And again, as I just mentioned here, the 4 different top categories: cross-cutting, environmental, social, and government, are on the top. Then within that, we have the cross-cutting and the topical standards. We have the subtopics and the subtopics. So looking into the environmental and the climate change, for example, we have a subtopic called climate change mitigation. For some of the other standards, we have other subtopics, and we can also have some subtopics in some of the standards. And then below those subtopics, we have the disclosure requirements, and then by the end, we also reach the data points. And why I show this is because many companies spend a lot of resources right now, or have spent a lot of resources on the DMA. And normally the DMA stands for double materiality analysis. And most often the DMAs, they focus on the 4 upper layers. But what we will talk about today is the 2 lower levels, and that's also a work that needs to be done. So the disclosure requirements and the data points can be read more about in the standards itself, and also in the data point list provided by EFRAG, who is the organization who supports with those standards. But also understanding how to get to those data points. What is the level below here? And that's where I will take you. So from here, I just want to show you an example. If we will zoom in a little bit on the E1 standard. So again, looking into this, we zoom in on E1, which is about climate change. And then I just want to show you there what's in this disclosure or in this standard in terms of disclosure requirements and data points. So here we have 55 narrative data points. We have 26 semi-narrative, meaning you can answer with yes or no, or quite simple answers. And we also have 127 quantitative data points, and those are all on an aggregated level again. And now we will focus primarily on the quantitative. Of course, the narrative and semi-narratives are also considered data points, and also needs to be collected from different places, but it's the quantitative that are a little bit more challenging, because those need sometimes calculations and also aggregations in another way. So among those quantitative metrics, we find topics such as energy consumption and mix. We find topics related to the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions. We find data points related to greenhouse gas removals, carbon credits, internal carbon pricing, anticipated financial effects from climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, and also financial resources allocated for all of those different things covered in the standard. And for now, we will focus primarily on the energy consumption and mix, because I know everyone here can relate to electricity, they can relate to district heating or fuels and so on. So it's quite tangible in that sense. So the energy consumption and mix, if we zoom in a little bit even more in this E1 standard, we have one of the disclosure requirements called E15, and again then energy consumption and mix. And perhaps you haven't seen this data point list from EFRAG. If you haven't, please reach out, and we will just send you the link to EFRAG's website where you can find this, because this is really a Bible when it comes to the CSRD reporting. And all of those data points are, of course, also built in our software in our CSRD module. But the E15 is the first, 23 rows here, or how many it is. And how this data point list works is that we first, EFRAG has provided an ID for each data point, and we also can find the reference in the standard where we can read more about this. So I know it's a little bit small now, but I will also go take you through an example. So if you just look at the first one here, it says total energy consumption related to own operations. And then it says like, please read more in paragraph 37. And then you can also look into the application requirement, which is shortened at ASAR here in AR35. And then you will get the full idea about what you need to report here. So we have about 33 data points related to energy consumption and mix. And if we just, here is just a reference on what it can look like in the standard, but I would like to take it here instead. If we just have a look at what it says related to energy consumption and mix, it says that you are supposed to provide information on your energy consumption and mix, not so much rocket science in that paragraph. But it also says that the objective of this is to provide an understanding of the undertakings or your organization total energy consumption in an absolute value, meaning megawatt hours, improvement in energy efficiency, exposure to coal, oil and gas related activities, and also the share of renewable energy in your overall mix. So that's what we're gonna disclose. So this is also important to understand the objective of this and why we are doing this. It also says, referring back to the first paragraph here, that you shall include the energy consumption in megawatt hours related to own operations disaggregated by, and then comes the different things that I showed you in the first slide. We first need to disclose energy consumption from fossil sources. We need to disclose energy consumption from nuclear sources, and we need to disclose energy consumption from renewable sources. And then those should be disaggregated by renewable sources, including biomass. And why that is important is because the biomass emissions doesn't add any emissions to the atmosphere. So we need to calculate those differently than the others. And we need to separate biomass, biofuels, biogas, hydrogen, and renewable sources. And then comes also information about that we need to disaggregate consumption of purchased or acquired electricity, heat, steam, and cooling. So we can't just say that this is the total energy consumption we had. We also must say that this part comes from electricity and this part comes from our district heating, for example. And then finally, consumption of self-generated non-fuel renewable energy. So if you produce energy somewhere in your organization, you also need to disclose that. And why I bring this up, I mean, it's not everyone think this is super fun to read paragraphs and to take this detail by detail, but why this is important is because very often the energy you consume, it consists of a mix of different sources. So just saying that you have used 100 kilowatt hours electricity for electricity during the last period doesn't help you here, because you also need to know what the energy source mix of that electricity was. The same goes if you have a fossil-driven car and then you fuel it with diesel or petrol. You need to know how much of this diesel or petrol was biofuels and what was fossil fuels. So you need to understand the fuel and the energy you're using here in order to reach the level that is required in the standard. And that's, again, why data is important. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop here, or I say unfortunately because I know it's a heavy reporting burden, but I also think it's very, very important that it is this detail, because we won't reach a fossil-free society if we don't focus on those numbers. But that unfortunately is a little bit with quotes around. But there is also another level here. If you are a company considered as one of those high climate impact sectors, and my best recommendation is to speak with your auditor if you don't know whether you are a high climate impact sector, you shall also further disaggregate your total energy consumption from fossil sources from what I mentioned before: coal and coal products, crude oil and petroleum products, natural gas, and also other fossil sources. This is also quite complex, especially if you have a global organization with presence in different parts of the world where the energy mix is different. So this is also one of the reasons why it's so important to understand the numbers. So from here, I think it was actually another paragraph as well. I thought it was it ended there, but it also says, in addition, where applicable, the undertaking shall disaggregate disclose separately its non-renewable energy production and renewable energy production in megawatt hours. So this is again related to own production of energy. But from here, I think it's also important to look into what key questions do you need to ask yourself in order to make sure you have what you need to reach the level required in those disclosure requirements. So talking again about energy, the first question we always ask is, do you know what the sources are of energy consumption in your organization? For example, do you have purchased electricity for different sites, offices, warehouses, and so on? Do you use steam? Do you use heating? And do you use cooling, for example, district cooling? Do you have any stationary combustion somewhere, burning oil that you use for heating, for example? And also, do you have any mobile combustion within your own operational control? And that's a very a term perhaps not used so often, but what it refers to is if you have any vehicles in your organization that you have control over, a car or a truck or a ship sometime. And what it says, I referred to those application requirements before, but what is important to remember here is that you are only supposed to report on energy consumed from processes owned or controlled by your organization. So in this case, you should not include, for example, upstream or downstream transport in your value chain, or cars or vehicles that you don't have control over. So that's the first question. When you know the sources of energy in your organization, the next question is, can you access data related to the energy consumption for each of those sources? And here comes the question of availability and quality of this data. And I know that it can be really tricky sometimes. It might sound easy to just get like the electricity bill and see the number of kilowatt hours, but what if you rent the space within another office, or if you can only see the total cost of your electricity and you only know the square meters, but you don't know the kilowatt hours, then you need to do some assumptions around this. The same challenge sometimes comes with the vehicles. Perhaps you don't know the exact amount of fuel they have consumed, but you know the kilometers you have driven, or you know the liters of fuel, and then you need to convert it to megawatt hours, as this is what we need to disclose in the standard. So we need to investigate here. When we know where you consume energy, we also need to invest what data can you get from those sources in order to make sure you can report. So data from different sites with different formats, and understand what does those formats look like, and understand whether you can access all the data or if you do need to do some estimations around this. And what it says is that it is important that everything you disclose should be as final energy consumption, referring to the amount of energy actually consumed. And I know sometimes it's easier to say like, yeah, this was the amount of liter I put into my car when I was at the fuel station. But if you haven't consumed it, it shouldn't be here. So that's also one definition to keep in mind. Next question is what unit you can access the data, and for fuel and for energy consumption in general, it's sometimes so that you get the data either directly in energy units such as megawatt hours, but you can also sometimes get it in volume, cubic meter of fuel, or mass, or distance. I drove this many kilometers, and then we need to find a way to convert this into megawatt hours, as that is also what you need to disclose in the end. And this is what it says in the standard, that if you have your data available in other units than megawatt hours, we shall convert them using suitable conversion factors that should, and also disclose those transparently in the report. So this is also something we do very often, and that our platform helps us with to do those conversions if you have your data in kilometers, for example. Next question, do you have information about the energy mix of each type of energy? Again, not only that this was the amount of diesel I used, you also need to know whether any of the diesel can be considered as biofuels, for example, or if you have a energy source mix for your electricity with hydropower, for example, and nuclear power and so on. Can you access this data, and can you disaggregate it by it? And then finally, can you also prove your claims? Because this is super important. What it says in the standard is that you need to have a conservative approach when you say like, this was the amount of renewable energy I had. If you can't prove it, you can't claim it. So that's also important. And make sure you have updated certificates, so you don't use the certificate you collected 3 years ago. It needs to be up to date. So that's some of the key questions. And from there, to set the context, if you haven't been collecting energy data before, I just want to show you what it can look like. And this is just a few real examples that I come across in terms of electricity. So this is one data set that we just downloaded from one energy supplier for one of my customers. Looks quite structured, I would say. But then comes the other example, which looks like this. And then you really need to understand, like, what do I need to look at here in order to use the data. Another version comes like this, so also structured, but in a totally transposed format. So instead of having everything really on the horizontal level, we have it on the vertical level. And then my favorite, which is not a rare thing, is that I get kind of those types of emails where it says like, I can't get this statistic, but in this case, we just read the energy meter once a year, but last time we didn't really do it. So we just read it the 1st of January or the last of January, and then we did it for 852 days at the same time. So just take this number, split it by 852 days, multiply it by 365, and then you will get your average consumption for a year. So this is also what it can look like. But of course, we want to have it sometimes in some kind of structured way. So when we work with this in the platform, we want to have it in one and the same format, so we can aggregate all of those different columns and data points that are related and required for the Csrd standard reporting, or the Csrd reporting. So I know time is running out a little bit, but what this comes up to is that 1,100 data points and aggregated data points is only the top of the iceberg. So I hope this helps you a little bit to understand how those aggregated, again, data points, which is the total amount of your fuels from nuclear, or your fuel from coal, or fuels from from petroleum. It's only the top of the iceberg, because you need to understand what data you have down under to be able to report on those 1100 data points. And understanding your underlying data is a must to get there. So I think this is so important to get to keep in mind when working with CSRD. Stefan, do you have any thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for putting us through this. Before we jump into the Q&A session, of course, thank you again, Sophie. Super
It's
intense.
a crash course, really.
I mean, this is huge, and maybe the question is then, how do you go about this? How do we help our customers, and where do you start? Before we jump into the Q&A, sorry, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you're right. There's actually one more slide here where it comes to where to start. And I know this is huge. The first thing I would say is to start in the top of your organization. You need to align on the organization's ambition level and understand the implications. And this is why, because perhaps you won't be able to do this for all of your data points and all go into this detail for everything. But what you need to do is to align on what is the priority and what is the ambition level. Will you be fine by reporting, as I said in the beginning, reporting the uncertainties, the assumptions you did, and be fine with reporting that you did a lot of simplifications? Or are your ambition to do everything as accurate as possible? That is the first question you need to decide on. And of course, you can have one ambition level for the first year, and then you can improve from year to year to year and set targets on how to do that. But this is not a question you can just answer as a one person or a one-man show. It's something you need to align on in the company. And when you know your ambition level and know your prioritization, I advise you to map up the requirements related to your material topics and assess the availability of underlying data. So exactly as we did now, just zooming in on one of the standards and take it disclosure by disclosure and look into the data points that you have there and understand and investigate, like if I should be able to disclose on this data point, what do I need to understand in my organization in order to get to those numbers? And when you've done that, number 3 here, it's also important to evaluate where you have the most impact and or where you have the most power to change, because sometimes it can be thrilling to just start where it's easy. Like, we don't have so many cars, so just start with the cars. But if you only have one car, then perhaps it's not such a good start to start there, because it won't make any difference whether you drove 100 kilometers or 90 kilometers in the total. Then it's better to start where you actually have your impact. And then it might be fine to just report a very simplified assumption for that single car, because no one will care so much about that anyway. And then also remember that there are phase-in requirements or phase-in simplifications in the standard. So you don't need to report everything in the first year, perhaps not, depending on how large your organization is. So consider those and decide also whether you want to use them or utilize them. However, if you feel like, this scope 3 seems just huge, I can skip it for the first year and then just forget about it for the first year, please remember that you will be in the same situation next year. So the reason to why we have those phases is also because it will probably take you a bit more time to prepare for it. So prepare, and then you can decide. Then you can decide when you want to start to report it. And then, of course, as we always recommend, is to automate as much as possible, and please take help with these things that everyone go through now, so you don't sit in your own corner, try to understand those standards, and then you lose a lot of time because you spend most of your time in just understanding it. So please reach out and take help where you can, and then focus your time on collecting the data and drive the change you need to do. So yeah, I feel very prepared for your question there, Stefan. But perhaps we got some other questions that I haven't had the chance to prepare in this way. I see we have some questions in the chat.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. So let's jump into the Q&A, and again, the reason for us to hold this webinar is because this is a super important topic for all our clients to understand that it's a journey and constant learning, and let's do it together. So the Q&A, we have a couple of questions here. Eleanor, you asked about. Is SustainLab CDP compliant? How would you answer to that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Eleanor. We are, in the sense that we are considering CDP also when we do those data strategies. And I think this is perhaps a little bit too short to just summarize our approach to this, but very, very simple said, where we start is always in your needs. So we always start by building the backbone of the system based on the data points that you need. So if you report on CDP, Csrd, and perhaps also some internal KPIs that you report to your organization, we make sure to include those requirements in the data structure that we build, and then we configure the platform based on that. And then from there, we can help you to collect the data. So we are not an off-the-shelf product where you can say, like, I want to report on CDP, click on that one and get the full form, because that is what the CDP software does and where you will fill in your numbers anyway. But what we do is to make sure you collect the data according to CDP. So you can look into SustainLab, seeing, okay, what was the number that I need to report in CDP, and then go to the next step and also report. So yes, we are compliant, but we want to integrate your need for CDP reporting into your other needs as the first step, and then we can help you to report in the next step. I don't know if that was I guess it's not as clear, but please reach out and let us just sit down together for a while so we can explain this in more detail.
Yes. No, but that's very good. Thank you. What you went through in these slides here is so one of the questions here, we were talking about one of the standards. That's what we went through here. What do you say? Are the others similar? The other standards?
Yeah. Actually, we sorry to disappoint you, but actually we only walk through one disclosure requirement within the standard. So there's actually quite much more in the standard. But you're right. We just picked a little piece of the full ESRS and looked at here. But I would say the reason why I choose this was because E1 is one of the most quantitative heavy standards, together with S1, which is about the own workforce. So the social standard about own workforce. Those are the two with the most quantitative metrics. And of course, if it's more qualitative, it's perhaps more easy to collect the data and align on what to write there. But the quantitative are more heavy. So E1, S1 are quite similar in terms of the data needed. And the other standards contains some quantitative metrics, but not at all as much as this. But of course, if you are reporting on water, for example, you need to disclose the total water consumed and discharged in your organization. So there are a few of those. E15 is also E5, sorry. Also contains some metrics related to circularity and materiality use and material use and waste streams. So yes, there are some more that needs to be considered in this data strategy.
Yeah. All right. Another question here. What type of support do you offer related to all of these? That's SustainLab, I guess.
Exactly. Or I also assume it's SustainLab. But that's also a great question. And as you said in the beginning, Stefan, we want to support you on everything related to CSRD. So we are a software provider in our core, but we also do a lot of consultancy services around this, because we know it's not only to get this form where you can type in your numbers and then everything is done. We know that it's a lot of work before and also after. When you have your numbers, we also want you to use your numbers, not only for compliance, but also for driving change in your business, set your targets and improve and improve and improve over time. So I would say we support you from that very, very beginning until the next circle starts. I won't say the end, because it's not the end, but until we can repeat and start over on the circle. So many of the customers who will start to report on 2025 years data, they choose to collaborate with us on several projects where the data strategy, which you just got a crash course in now, and of course it's a lot more to it than can fit into those 30 minutes. But we do a data strategy where we look into all of the disclosure requirements relevance and look into the data and set up the data structure they need for it. We configure the platform, we onboard them to the platform so they can use it themselves, and we perhaps also do the DMA for them, the double materiality analysis, or sometimes and or the gap analysis as well. So many customers pick and choose a little bit, like, this is where I need support and this is where I need support. And sometimes it's about education or supporting with policies and processes and all of those things as well. So I think a great way to start, or a great place to start, is to just help us understand where you are at now and where you want to be in 6 months and in a year and so on, and then we can tailor the project for you. But the software, of course, is in our core, so that's something we are very proud of.
Thank you for that answer. And I think you touched upon a couple of the what you want to answer next question here, but Jesko put on a long question here, but there are many thoughts about the CSRD. It's risking to become a burden on the reporting exercise, not giving any real benefits from it. And what are your thoughts towards taking this to the next level, taking this to operations, taking this to products, to service development in a sustainable way? Any advice here?
Perhaps I won't answer exactly what you asked for now, when it was such a wide question, but some thoughts around it. And the first thing is that what we are doing now with sustainability data is what's been going on for financial data for decades. So ask your CFO in your organization and ask whether they think they spend too much time on numbers, or if the numbers actually help them to drive the business. And I guess the answer will be both. Yes, they spend a lot of time on numbers, and yes, the numbers help them. And that's where we are going in terms of sustainability data as well. So we need to spend time on this, otherwise we can't use the data. So I wouldn't say it's a lot of waste of time to get this data, collect all the data and do the calculations and everything. It's a necessity in order to use it. So I think that's important to remember, that this is a rapid shift that we are doing now, and that's why we are struggling. But it will be better. And how to make use of this data, I think that's also one of the main things that we are working with when we do those data strategies, and also what I said in the beginning, where I showed you this, like GRI, CDP, CSRD, and so on. If you also have internal goals, perhaps your purchase or procurement department wants some KPIs, and perhaps your management team wants some KPIs, and your HR team wants some other KPIs. Make sure to also include those data points that are needed in order to deliver that data to them in the data strategy, so we can collect all the data we need at once, and then we can just build a lot of KPIs on top of this. And we have a lot of customers who make tailored dashboards in the software, where they share the dashboards with different people within the organization, depending on who needs what data. And the best thing, of course, is when we can decentralize the responsibility for sustainability in the same way as we do with financial responsibility. Each team may be responsible for different parts of the financials, the budget and the revenue and the costs. And in the same way, we can distribute the responsibility of making sure we purchase or procure services within our budget of CO2 emissions. And we have in the social or an HR team, we have KPIs that is about educating our employees in terms of sustainability, for example, and how can we make sure this information gets decentralized in the organization. I think that is where it actually starts. So a little bit of a fluffy answer, but I know it's a lot of things to do here.
It is, and I tend to talk about this question like, now it's finally time to measure us equally. So we have two equal companies. Before, we only could measure each other on the financial outcome. Now
Yes.
this is equally important, and we should perform in both areas. And now we can be measured as a competitor for real, not just on financial outcome. So it's a super important question, and thank you for asking it, because it is a super important question. The last one before we end today's session is about one slide that you showed in the beginning with 5 points with CSRD first were, and it ended with disclosure requirements and data points. What was the other points, and how does these correlate with each other? Could you go through that slide again?
Yeah, I know we are a little bit over time, so drop out if you need, of course. But I guess I didn't hear exactly what you said now, Stefan, but I think we are talking about this slide.
Slide 5, I would say. Yes,
This
exactly. The two last ones there.
Okay. And please help me to understand the question. The question is, what was the different layers and how do they relate to each other? Is that the question?
Yeah, the first 5 points are the CSRD, and it ended with disclosure requirements and data points. So this is the slide. What was the other points, and how does they correlate with each other? What are they, and how do they? What?
Yeah. I really understand why this question is asked, because this is something that many struggle with. And the thing is that the ESRS standards, as I said before, the ESRS standards used for reporting on CSRD, they cover several sustainability matters, and they call it sustainability matters when they refer to the 4 first layers. So we have categories. If I just go back to this, we have the cross-cutting, we have the environmental, we have the social, and then we have the governance. Within each of those categories, we have standards. They are calling it the cross-cutting standards. Here's 2. And then they call it the topical standards, which is 10 different topical standards. And then, not to forget, it might also be entity-specific standards and sector standards, but we don't have those yet. It will take some more years before we have them. So now this is the sector agnostic standards, which means those are relevant for everyone. So far, so good, I hope. And then within each of those standards, so within each of those boxes, there are also sub-standards and sub-sub-standards. And this is something, if you just email me or please email me and I will send you the reference to the standard where you can read about the subtopics and sub-subtopics. But some of them have only subtopics. So climate change, for example, is where we have climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, and then energy consumption or energy use as 3 different subtopics. And some also have subtopics, so it can be another layer below the subtopic from the first as well. So that's the sustainability matters that they are talking about in the ESRS standard. And as I said, this is also what is the main scope of the double materiality analysis, where you need to assess whether those subtopics or sub-subtopics, or sustainability matters if you prefer, are material in either financial or impact way. However, also in the standards, we have the disclosure requirements, and then ESRS has converted the disclosure requirements, which you can also find in the standards, into data points, which is what you can find in this data point list also provided by ESRS. So if I just go to this slide again, you have the standards where you can read the different disclosure requirements, and then you have the data point list where you find all the data points, which is just a conversion of the text which we have here into specific data points. But what is important is that it's no clear link actually between this part and this part, and that's been a gap in the communication from ESRS from the beginning. But just before midsummer, they released a Q&A answer where they explained how we should consider the link between the subtopics and the disclosure requirements. So imagine you have considered climate change mitigation as material. You of course need to know which disclosure requirements are relevant for me to report on and which data points are relevant for me to report on. But that's not super clear when you just read the standard. So there is another document that came, I think, just on the 20th of June or something this summer, which explains this a little bit. But unfortunately, it's not so clear anyway, because what it says there, and this is very, very detailed. Now, I take this just because you asked this question. I see many people are still here, so I guess this is interesting for many. But within the disclosure requirements, they are divided in 4 different categories, so to say. So you have the policies, you have the metrics, you have the targets, and then you have the actions. So of those 4, it's 3 that are related very clearly to the data points. You need to disclose the policies, the targets, and actions for each of the subtopics and sub-subtopics that are material to your organization. However, when it comes to the metrics, it's not a clear link. And what it says in this additional information that the ESRS released during the summer is that this analysis needs to happen on a company level. You need yourself to decide whether it's relevant or not to disclose the data point depending on the outcome of your double materiality analysis. So that's a little bit blurry. I know many are struggling with this, and we support many in just like mapping this. But it takes a little bit of analysis to get this right. So I understand the question, what is the link? There's no clear link, 100% clear link, but we have some guidance that we can rely on, where we can at least for 50 or 75% of the data points relate them to the different subtopics and sub-subtopics. But for the others, we still need to do a bit of analysis on the company level to get it right. So that was perhaps a longer answer than you expected, but this is something I think a lot about and trying to understand the best I can.
Yeah. Please jump to the last slide, and I think we
are over time already.
Close this down for today. Thank you all for joining us. Please reach out. We will answer the questions that we didn't have time with in this meeting, and reach out again if you want to follow the other episodes of this series regarding Csrd. We have done a few. We are doing more later on. Again, thank you for being here with us this morning. Thank you, Sophie, for a fantastic presentation again.
Thank you.
And have a fantastic day.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.